Important session for us, obviously because it's Sarah and Sam, so it's going to be a really good session. But also, it's the first time we're going to be using some technology here as well. You'll see the QR code up on the screen, so we're going to be doing some polls, so it's really exciting for us. And no better topic than the for and against of United Ireland. So here's Sarah Carey. Give her a huge round of applause, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks very much. Thank you and good evening everybody, and thank you for your stamina and sticking with us here all day. This is definitely the most dedicated audience we have at any of our summer schools. But you have work to do tonight. Everybody get out your phones please. Scan this QR code if you haven't already. It's going to take you to a page which will currently say poll inactive, a bit like the border poll. So don't mind that blank page for the minute, but questions are going to come up as we have this conversation, and we really want to know what you think, and we really want to get your votes on this. So have your phones at the ready. It's one of those conferences where you can actually have your phone out and there will be no shame. Before we start, I want to say a special hello. A lot of you will have known Paul Johnston, the British Ambassador to Ireland, and gotten to know him over the past few years as he's gone out and about. His term is coming up in September, but his successor is here tonight, Cara Owen. Where are you, Cara? There you are, and I think we should give her a very special welcome to Ireland, Cara. And she's continuing Paul's tradition of getting out and about and meeting people. And Cara, I just hope it's not like when a new parish priest arrives and everybody spends his term wishing that they had the old priest back. So we hope you get a warmer welcome and a quicker settling in than a new parish priest. So our title this evening is The Case for and Against a United Ireland. And I have with me here Sam McBride, Northern Ireland editor of the Belfast Telegraph and the Sunday Independent. And he's written a book along with Fintan O'Toole which is doing something so interesting about the case for and against a border poll. And what they're doing is they say, we are not pushing you to change your mind, but we are urging you to open it. So before we get into the nitty-gritty, Sam, explain how the book works. Yeah.
Well, first, thank you very much to the summer school here for the invitation to be here. It's been very interesting today already. This is a brilliant idea, I think, but that's not self-praise because it was nothing to do with me. It was Porrick, who is floating around somewhere here, came to me with this idea. He went to Fintan with this idea. And it's a very simple idea. It's almost turning yourself into a barrister, where you're making the best possible case for an issue, for a proposition in this case. You're doing that honestly, you're doing it honourably, you're not making things up, you're not embellishing things, but you are trying to find the best possible arguments, testing the arguments, and then you're just flipping it round and saying, well, actually, here's all the counter-arguments, here's why you shouldn't do what in the last chapter maybe I thought you should do. And so, having done that, the thing that strikes me as somebody who comes from Northern Ireland, who's written about Northern Ireland politics for many years, is that our politics particularly, this isn't so true of this jurisdiction, but our politics are defined by this issue. People vote unionist or nationalist overwhelmingly. There is about 20% of people in the middle who don't. The vast majority of people who vote for parties that are defined by this issue. People feel strongly about this issue. And yet the shallowness of most people's thinking on this, the shallowness of my thinking on this, prior to thinking about this more deeply, is pretty remarkable. And so when you actually look at the data, some of what we thought we knew factually is now out of date. We'll come on to this in terms of things like health. Mm-hmm. Some of the arguments that we thought were in one camp are actually in the other. Some arguments that maybe people haven't considered at all could be the most important arguments. So this is not the definitive big thick tome on Irish unity. Mm-hmm. This is a fairly compact book. We're not academics, we're journalists, we're writing in normal language for normal people, but trying to get them to think about this. And the final thing I'll say about this is that hopefully when people look at this, they don't just read the chapter that confirms their own particular view. Yeah. Hopefully they do that and enjoy it and feel it's a fair representation of what they aspire to. But this hopefully exposes people to the fact that other people think differently, and those aren't stupid people. Those aren't people who are necessarily bigoted or sectarian or out of touch with the modern world. There are reasonable arguments and rational arguments in both of these camps. Each of these chapters were incredibly easy to write. In fact, it was difficult to constrain.
And just to be clear, so Fintan writes a chapter for United Ireland, and then he writes one against it.
He does.
You write one for it, and then you write one against it. So you're both arguing both sides. And I think as a thought exercise, especially in today's polarised world, if everybody did that on other issues, what a more interesting and richer politics we would have.
Well, not necessarily.
Okay,
because
right?
Boris Johnson did write a letter to himself
Bad
saying,
precedent.
here's the
Okay.
case for Brexit and the case against Brexit. It didn't necessarily turn out very well.
Yeah.
But yes, there is something to be said for at least having the debate and a genuine debate. A lot of this is a synthetic debate. So we have Mary Lou McDonald yesterday or 2 or 3 days ago saying, let's have a border poll by 2030. That's perfectly fine. Politicians can call for whatever they want to. But it's not a serious proposition at this point. You need to do the hard work of actually looking at the data, looking at the problems, how do you get over these problems. And so we've got this paradox that Brexit has made Irish unity more possible than at any point since partition. I don't think there's any question about that whatsoever. It has never been more credible, more possible, and there has never been an electorate in Northern Ireland, which has always been the bloc on this, which is more open to it. There are people who are absolutely willing to be persuaded, and that might tilt the scales in that particular direction. And yet, Brexit, paradoxically, makes it more difficult to win a border poll, I think, than ever before with those people. Because for those people, they will not accept it'll be all right in the night. They'll not say, look, don't believe the naysayers, don't believe the doomsters. They know what happened with Brexit when people said that, and this would be 100 times more complicated. This is a new country. This is not about leaving a trading bloc.
So let's talk about the timing and the mechanism. So Mary Lou McDonald, is talking about it soon. Leo Varadkar is talking, about holding one soon. So what do you think is a reasonable time frame, a responsible time frame, and what might happen to change that?
Well, at the risk of sounding like a politician, I'm not going to answer the question because I don't get into that in the book. I mean, it's not really the point of it. This book is written in a particular period. By the time we get to a border poll, lots of this might be superseded. The things that we think are important right now might seem completely trivial. I mean, if climate change turns out the way that the scientists say it's going to turn out, if this happens in 20 or 30 years' time, and people might look back on some of the stuff in this book and say, you know what? That's completely ludicrous. It's completely irrelevant to the issues that are maybe life and death or economically challenging at that point. But I think the one thing that I certainly believe in, that Fintan certainly believes, is that if we're going to do this, and it's clearly a part of the Good Friday Agreement, people have an absolute right to argue for a border poll, to have a border poll. It must be held if the criteria in the Good Friday Agreement is met, which is that there is a credible belief by the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland that it would be won by nationalism, that people would vote for United Ireland in the north, that is. He doesn't need to think about the south, just in Northern Ireland. That has to happen. But if we do that without thinking it through carefully, it could be catastrophically deadly for the place where I live, and also potentially for this jurisdiction. There are a lot of people in Northern Ireland who are open-minded about this in a way that their parents weren't, their grandparents weren't. But what they're not open-minded about, for the most part, is anything that looks reckless. Brexit was reckless economically. This will be reckless with people's lives if it's messed up. That's not to say you can't do it, and we'll get into the incredible possibilities that there are here. But people who say, let's have a border poll, and then you say to them, well, let's discuss X or Y, and they say, oh, no, that's for somebody else to think about, or that's for a citizens' assembly, or that's for the government. It's not really credible. It's not serious.
Okay, so let's have our first audience poll. And the question is, do you think a border poll should be held within 10 years, 10 to 20 years, or further into the future? So start voting on that. Sam, one other quick question on the mechanism of the poll while people are voting on that. Let's see how they're doing. 32, 22. Would there be a poll on the whole island, like at the Good Friday Agreement, or would it be sequentially north first, then south? What's the thinking on that?
So when you look at the Good Friday Agreement, when you look at the Northern Ireland Act, the piece of British legislation that enacts it in UK law, it's actually, there are more possibilities than lots of people assume. So because the Good Friday Agreement vote was an all-island vote, there was a vote in the south on the same day as a vote in the north. That is the assumption that a lot of people have, that this would be a single process, albeit in two jurisdictions with two electorates, and there are certain complexities to that. One of the problems with that is that if the North votes yes, which doesn't seem likely right now, but may well be the case in whatever number of years, and if the South votes no, which I don't think is likely, but is not impossible, what does that do? So that's obviously a gut punch to Northern nationalists. So here they are, abandoned by the people who they hoped would embrace them at the point they could persuade enough people to vote for Irish unity. But I think what a lot of people don't think about is what that means for Northern Unionists. For Unionists at this point, they've lost. It's over. Northern Ireland's gone. You cannot have a country, a state, a region, a jurisdiction in which most people do not want it to exist. It's not credible. People wouldn't be paying taxes or be civil disobedience. It's over. But at that point, having finally done what other people on the island had urged them to do for over 100 years, they'd find that even then they weren't wanted. So it would be disastrous. And yet, if you don't do it on the same day, you then get into a situation where, what if the North votes yes, the South votes on a different day? You then get into the quite dangerous territory where loyalist paramilitaries are incentivised that the only way they can stop Irish unity at that point is bombs in Dublin or something of that nature. And that is such an obvious risk. Brendan O'Leary has written about this, Padraig O'Malley has written about this, that it has to be taken seriously. And we'll, I think, come on to some of the possibilities there.
So 42% are saying they could hold a poll within 10 years, which seems very fast to me. So that's an interesting measure of the audience. 21 further into the future, 37 10 to 20. I'd be further into the future myself now. So thank you. That's a strong indication of how you're feeling. Now, let's get into some of the arguments. And this is the first one that Fintan addresses in the book, and you as well, about the physicality of it, the geography. That a lot of the time when I'm looking, or other people are looking at the island of Ireland, you go, well, of course it's one nation. It's one island. So give me the for that and the against for that.
Well, if you were coming into Ireland for the first time from Australia 500 years ago, whatever it might be, coming in from the moon today, and you saw this place from space, or you saw it on a map, the most obvious way in which to organise this island's affairs would be on a single basis. It's just the simplest, most obvious, most logical thing that would occur to you if you didn't know anything else about this place. And it is generally to the detriment of islands that are divided where there is that division. So places like Timor, places like Cyprus, there are various places where this has happened. Generally, that's not seen as a good thing. And so there is a logicality. We talked earlier about infrastructure. We talked about the north-south interconnector. We talked about the fact that there are salt caverns outside Carrickfergus that maybe could store hydrogen, maybe they couldn't. Who knows? I'm not going to have any knowledge of that. But there are things that that on an island are of benefit to one jurisdiction or the other. And we've recently had the debate in Northern Ireland about the A5 road, incredibly dangerous road. So many people have lost their lives on that road over the last 10 years alone, let alone going back further. And yet that is also a crucial conduit to this county, to Donegal, getting to Dublin and getting to other parts of the island. And yet having two jurisdictions means that you have not just two governments, but you have two entire systems of operating, two different planning systems. So the north-south interconnector has now been approved in Northern Ireland. It's now getting held up in the south. It used to be the other way around. These things just go on and on and on. So when you're trying to planning on a single basis is logical and it's natural. The counter-argument to that is that lots of people who say that is obvious here, and you're going to say at some point, this is ludicrous, you're arguing with yourself, but be that as it may, lots of people who say that is obvious also think that it's natural that Scotland should be independent on the island of Britain.
Yeah.
Lots of nationalists support the SNP and maybe even support Plaid and think that Wales should be independent. Ultimately, geography is not destiny. It does not determine how you must be set up in terms of your government structure. So there may well be a straightforward logic to that, but the difficulty here is that the history of this place is such that if you were the first person in, you might not draw the border at all. You certainly might not draw it where it is drawn right now. But it is what it is. And we can't make the world precisely the way we want it to be. We have inherited certain things, some good, some bad. One of the things that we have inherited is the border. And so the only question for us today is not something abstract about would it be better if somebody had done something different in 1921, etc. The question for us today can only be, would it make it better for us, for our children, if we got rid of it, or would it make it worse? And if you have a situation where there is this almost invisible border on the island, we know that there are genuine aspects to it, tangible aspects. There's a currency border, there's a legal border, miles an hour change to kilometres. I mean, there are some trivial things, there are some very important things. But if that is not impeding ordinary citizens' lives in any significant way, if it's not hindering people's expression of who they are on either side of that border, how much upheaval, how much money, how much potential bloodshed are we prepared to accept to get rid of something that's almost unseen?
Money. Money makes the world go round. Now, I think people are familiar with this debate. If I divide it into what I call maybe the Doyle camp and the John Fitzgerald Edgar Morgenroth camp. You might know what I'm talking about. So John Doyle would argue that, look, this is not going to cost that much money. John Fitzgerald and Edgar Morgenroth are saying 40 billion, I think, isn't that right? So, talk to me about the case for, let's say, what we call the John Doyle argument.
Yes, so what John Doyle says is that for years there has been this argument from unionism and from some nationalists who are not enthusiastic about immediately in the south having to pick up the tab for this, who look at the subvention that Northern Ireland gets, who look at the big subsidy that Northern Ireland gets from the Treasury in London every year, something like £14 billion sterling at the moment, and they say, my goodness, we could never afford that. I mean, imagine if we had to. So there's been polling by RTE where they've broken this down and they've said, if this meant X thousand euro on your tax bill, would you pay it? And of course, the higher it goes up, unsurprisingly, the fewer and fewer people say they're willing to do that. What John Doyle says is, look, this is fundamentally mistaken. There has been a misunderstanding about this. Some of it is entirely, in fact, almost all of it is not malign in any sense. It's an incredibly complex area. And so you've got issues such as companies who are set up in Northern Ireland, who operate, Tesco, big global companies, big UK companies, and maybe where their profits are recorded is different to where the transaction is actually taking place. So first of all, it's very hard to pin down where exactly money comes from and where it goes, even in the modern world. But more fundamentally, he says that the subvention includes lots of things that we simply would not need in the United Ireland. So we don't need a royal family. So there's a portion of the subvention that Northern Ireland contributes to the royal family, and that is billed, and then that means that we're in deficit, along with lots of other things, and so that has to be made up by the Treasury. We're not going to need nuclear weapons. We're not going to need lots of British embassies in places that Ireland doesn't think it's necessary to have its presence. And so there are lots of elements of that which quite logically and quite clearly will not be needed. He says that can drastically shave down the bill to a few billion pounds, euros, and that you can really get it to a point where it's not even remotely debatable, essentially, as to whether this is an economic hindrance. Ireland can clearly afford it. It's an incredibly wealthy country. It is laden with gold. Whatever about some of the sessions earlier wasn't really what I recognised from looking at some of the data here. But it's a very unequal country. 10% of people hold, I think, 50% of the wealth. So there's a lot of people who don't feel that because they don't have it. But the money is here, somewhere. Mm-hmm. And so he says, that's fine. The counter-argument to that is that he's right in some cases. We don't need nuclear weapons. We don't need the royal family if there's a united Ireland. There's lots of other things that you could absolutely whittle away. But there are some things that we cannot get away from, and the biggest of those is pensions. And on pensions, what John Doyle says is that there is a moral responsibility on the British government to pay taxpayers who have funded state pensions, their pensions, regardless of what happens. And what he says is, look, if you're a British citizen and you leave the UK at the moment, you go to Spain, you go to Portugal, you go to wherever it might be, you go to Ireland, you still get paid your British state pension. So why would this be any different in a united Ireland? The difference here potentially, and we can only argue about this because we do not know what the negotiation will be, is that this would be different in that it's a constituent part of the UK leaving and taking away that tax base. So pensions in the British system are not like my private pension pot, which is very modest, I should say, where at least I get a thing telling me every year how little it is. Yeah. But that is my pot, and short of a huge Great Depression, that is money that is mine, effectively, that is held in trust for me by a private company. That's not the way the British system works at all. We pay in, and money is immediately paid out to current pensioners. It's paid from
current revenue, same as in the South.
Yep. Yeah. And so what happens here if Britain simply says, I'm sorry, we're not paying, so there's no legal obligation to pay. It's entirely up to what they want to do on the day. So, A, who's the Prime Minister? Is it Nigel Farage? Is it somebody like that? Is he really going to pay? Do people believe that? And secondly, even if you follow through the John Doyle line on this the entire way through, and you say, look, even if, let's say, Britain breaks up after Northern Ireland was to leave, let's say Scotland leaves, are English taxpayers going to keep paying this forever? Even if they are, because it's a diminishing number of pounds every year being sent. People die, the bill goes down, so it's not going to get any bigger. Even in those circumstances, I think there is a potential problem, because at the minute, British taxpayers, British pension holders are distinguished based on their residency. So if you live in Spain, you get your pension, but you don't get an uplift for inflation every year. So already in real terms, you get a cut. And in these terms, there would be a situation, I think, a bit like Brexit. If Northern Ireland left, it would be seen as further evidence of Britain's decline in the world, further evidence that the full decline of Britain in terms of Scotland leaving, in terms of maybe even Wales leaving would happen. I think what happened with Brexit would probably happen, where the pound would devalue further. And so even if John Doyle is right about every single element of that, and we still get paid by the British government exactly what we should be getting as if we were still in the UK, the money we'd get would be in pounds sterling, and we'd be spending in euros, and so our spending power would be less.
Okay.
In the north. And sorry, the final thing for what is probably mostly a southern audience is that regardless of this, I'm not remotely worried about this as somebody who's paying into my state pension, because I will get a state pension. I mean, it's inconceivable that people in Northern Ireland will not get a state pension. In fact, we might even get a bigger state pension if Ireland was to pay it.
Well,
but you'll be paying for it.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. So if we go to Fitzgerald Morganroth, they talk about equalisation, and that this is where the real cost comes in for the South. So, for example, the standard rate of unemployment benefit in the Republic is double what it is in the North. The non-contributory state pension in the South is 2.5 times as large. They talk about things like public sector pay. So, for example, a primary school teacher in Newry, the starting salary is about £23,000. In Dundalk, it's about €36,000. So, if you want to bring payments in the North to match the South, and how long is that teacher in Newry going to take a smaller salary than the one in Dundalk, that's where the money kicks in.
Yeah, and I think on that, John Doyle has a significant argument in that I do not think that on day one of a United Ireland... No,
but over 10 years, over 15 years, it's gradually having to come up.
I think that the time frame that he suggests, and I'm not going to say the number because I'm speaking from the top of my head, but I think that it's too long. I don't think people would tolerate it that long, but they would certainly, I think, tolerate it for 3 or 4 or 5 years if they knew their pay was going up every year anyway. Actually, it would be an economic problem, I think, if you were to have a sudden influx of money from the South. You'd have inflationary pressures if that was to happen. There would be other difficulties there. But I think where John Doyle is also correct is that he says that this is ultimately a negotiation. So there are no real precedents for this. There's no laws that really determine this. This comes down to what can Ireland get and what will Britain give them. And in that, there'll be things like the national debt. So Northern Ireland's share of the national debt. Ireland could say, you know what, you're not giving us on pensions, we'll stuff you on debt. You're not getting anything from us on debt. And those things might cancel each other out. But in that, there is uncertainty, because this is a negotiation. So ultimately, this is something which we cannot conclusively know, and will not know, I think, unless there's a formal concordat lodged with the UN or whatever between these two states before we get to a vote. We will ultimately be in a position where there's going to be a negotiation. The risk for Ireland is that it's already agreed to buy the car, and now it's haggling over the price.
Yeah.
Because you can't go back on a border poll. If we vote for it, it's going to happen.
So let's ask our audience. Next question. If you are a Southern voter, how much are you willing to compromise financially to get Irish unity? A lot? A little? Almost nothing? Nothing. Okay. What do we got? Goes up and down there. A little. Okay. So just put on the crystal ball, or look into the crystal ball there for a minute, Sam. I mean, how do you think that money debate would play out north and south while those negotiations were going on? Like, if I'm in the north, does it look pretty obvious that I should vote yes, because if we get a united Ireland, I will be richer? If I'm in the south, I'm going, I don't want to pay for this. How do you see that debate playing out? So
what is really clear is that at the time of partition in 1921, Northern Ireland, the northeast, as it then was the wealthy part of the island. It was the economic powerhouse of the island. There's figures in the book which I won't go through here simply because I can't remember them, but they're astonishing about the number of...
it had the industry,
just astonishing. I mean, some of the biggest industries in the world were in Belfast. I mean, as somebody who comes from Belfast, I find it hard to believe, but it's true, and it was absolutely the case then. And it's really telling that in the Ulster Covenant, which is now seen as a very Protestant document, harking back to the Presbyterian Covenant in Scotland, all of that stuff, seen in quite sectarian terms. The first line in the Ulster Covenant talks about being convinced in our consciences that for the material well-being of what is Ulster at that point, what is now mostly in Northern Ireland, we should stop Home Rule. And so, while absolutely religion was a central part of it, I'm not downplaying that at all, it was genuine, it was there, it was also always bound up in trade. And that's been flipped around.
Well, the Protestant work ethic and the prosperity gospel, is a key part of that too. You could say that was religion too. So.
Well, I'll not get into any theological debates here. I mean, I think what is beyond dispute now, there are elements of this, lots of this is open to debate, and it's not possible to have a clear answer. What is beyond dispute is that the Republic is the wealthy part of the island, astronomically so. So GDP in the Republic is 10 times GDP in Northern Ireland. Now, I know that there are legitimate and serious academic debates about what GDP means. It's not, I know that GNI is a better indicator. I know all of that. But if we're comparing in crude terms the money that is somehow funneling through Ireland at some level, even if that stops tomorrow, and I think this is the huge risk for the Republic, and one of the reasons why people in the Republic may be persuaded to vote for this, that the Republic is an incredibly wealthy society right now, but it rests on fragile pillars. Even before Trump, and we had to revise the book slightly after Trump when he came in with tariffs to make this explicit. Even before Trump, it was obvious that Ireland is getting 84% of corporate taxes in Ireland come from foreign multinationals. Now, that's brilliant, but if anything happens that those countries say you must pay tax in your own jurisdiction, in many cases that's why they're here. However, even if they all leave tomorrow, and which isn't going to happen, but even if everything was to go catastrophically wrong, that has already bequeathed an incredible legacy of infrastructure, of hospitals, of schools, of roads, of rail. I know lots of people on this side of the border think they don't see that. And one of the difficulties here that people like Brendan O'Leary have talked about is that Sinn Féin, as an opposition party in the south, talks about the Republic as an almost basket case, but in the north they say it's a land of milk and honey. It is actually a bit of a land. I mean,
and how long can they sustain that? By the way, so our numbers coming up here, 51% a little, 10% nothing, 9% almost nothing. So that's 70-30, with only a third of people saying they'd be willing to give up a lot, which I think is interesting, and most people saying, nah, not much. So go back to the point you were making there, Sam.
So I think at this point, all of this is interesting, and all of what we've written may or may not be interesting, but it's pretty abstract because we don't have a serious proposition yet. We don't know whether what's being proposed is a federal state, a unitary state. We don't even have a position where the major parties have clear positions in those things. We don't know what it means for flag, for anthem, for going back into the Commonwealth, for all of those emotive issues and practical issues. But I think that there is a very, very clear situation here where if you're in the Republic and you're doing well, if you're in Northern Ireland and you're doing well and you're open-minded about this and you're not firmly in one camp or the other, the safe option is to stick with what you've got. People who are middle class, people who are doing well, who are in good jobs, for the most part, it's a big risk to create a new country. And I think sometimes people think that this is bolting Northern Ireland onto the south. That's not what it's going to be.
It's not Germany.
This is tearing up the Republic and tearing up Northern Ireland and starting again. This is a new country. That's the only way it's going to be voted for.
Right, but then the other side of that is there will be an economic uplift. That Northern Ireland would improve, it would be unleashed, from the shackles of British rule and, the problems with Stormont and all of that. So there could be an uplift.
But also, the flip side of what I was going to say is that while that's true for the middle classes, as I said, a lot of people in this jurisdiction hold a lot of wealth. A lot of people don't have a lot of wealth. They're not well off. And there was a stat earlier, I think, about the average person in the Republic has, is it €80,000 in savings or something of that nature. But that average is very unhelpful because it's right, I'm sure, but it's simply
it's an average. Some people have nothing.
Crude measure of where the middle line happens to be. Actually, if you're on the wrong side of that line, if you're struggling, if you're in a state where things are very expensive, where housing is very difficult to get, we have all of these difficulties. Throwing it all up in the air is a very attractive proposition, and that's true in the north as it is in the south, and it's no coincidence that in Brexit a lot of the people who came out to vote for the first time were people at the bottom rung of society who said, you know what, maybe these guys are right that it will be problematic, but what do we have to lose? It's not working for us now.
Loyalist violence, and this was something I hadn't given too much consideration myself until I read the book. But it's a real problem, and you have a statistic about the number of paramilitaries in the north versus the number of people in the army here. So
it's disturbing.
So talk to me about that.
So the last leaked PSNI MI5 assessment of loyalist paramilitarism in Northern Ireland is something like 10 years old now, but it's the best that we have to go on, and it said that there are about 12,500 members of loyalist paramilitary organisations. That's double the number of Irish Defence Force soldiers. Now, it's not comparing like with like. Some of these people have beer bellies and they're sitting in bars. Some of them are not like that. Some of them are very dangerous people.
And they can all plant a bomb if they want.
They can all plant a bomb, and there are lots of people who, in the right circumstances, would swell their ranks. So forget about what the number is now. That's extraordinary now. It would be more extraordinary. So let me approach this from both angles. Yeah. So the argument that that this shouldn't be insurmountable is that you obviously cannot have a situation where he who has the biggest gun decides what happens in a democracy. That is not democratic. It's a ludicrous way to run a country. It's not how we want our island to be, wherever we happen to live. It is the history of this island, but it's not where we want it to be. And so if we go down that route of saying, because these people might threaten violence, we can't vote a certain way, or we can't do this, forget that. That's not how we can operate. And also, what we should always remember, I think, is that the Loyalist paramilitaries are heavily infiltrated by the British forces, by MI5, by the PSNI, by other agencies, and so there is incredibly good intelligence on these people in a way that there isn't on some other actors in Northern Ireland. So there should be very good warning, people who can be influenced, and people who potentially can help stop attacks before they happen. However, of all the problems with unity, this is the one that I think cannot be dismissed. And some people, it's the most concerning thing to me as somebody, as a citizen in Northern Ireland, that some people dismiss this and say, you're scaremongering, you're encouraging these people, you're trying to, give them the idea, as if nobody else on this island ever had the idea of being violent before a journalist wrote about it in 2025. But it is so fundamental to the future of this island that we are able to decide these things peacefully and democratically. And the thing that scares me most about this is that when you look at what happened in America with Donald Trump, he claimed that an election was stolen from him. We know it wasn't. And he convinced, in a very sophisticated first world country with deep democratic underpinnings, as we thought, with all sorts of checks and balances, he convinced tens of millions of people that that was true. Mm-hmm. It wasn't true, and nobody here really seriously thinks that. In Northern Ireland, we have a long history of vote stealing. And so if you have a narrow vote in favour, and this cuts both ways, but I think it's most problematic in favour because the status quo is always less disappointing, I suppose, if it endures, because you can always overturn it in the future, in 7 years' time. If loyalists think this is it, it's over, they've lost, it's the big one, it's done, and it was stolen from them, that's incredibly problematic. So just a few years ago, the SDLP accused Sinn Féin, using parliamentary privilege, of stealing votes in Foyle, in Derry. And said that they won that election narrowly based on stolen votes. Now, that's never been proven. People haven't been prosecuted. I'm not saying that happened. What I am saying is that that's within nationalism. People are saying that.
And the SDLP are the centre ground. Like, it's not like they're Donald Trump and they're, conspiracy theorists and that,
There are people who are quite open on both sides about having stolen votes in the past. And so if you have a situation where people believe that this has been stolen on either side, there is the danger of going back to the ancestral memory of what happens when an injustice is done to you in these terms. For Loyalists, 1912, and for Unionists, for almost every Unionist, when the centenary of the Ulster Covenant was marked in 2012, almost to a person, from the most liberal to the most hardline Unionist, that was seen as something to be venerated. These were heroes who stopped Home Rule, who kept Ulster, as it then was, out for a while, and then ultimately the 6 counties of Northern Ireland out permanently. 1916, the same thing happened on the other side. These were people who didn't have a democratic mandate. They killed innocent people, but the end justified the means. They did a noble thing. What has come out of it has been amazing. It was just in terms of what was being done to Irish people by British people before that, etc., etc. And so the ancestral memory here is that in certain circumstances, when your back is to the wall, violence is not just an acceptable thing, it's a noble thing. And that's something that we have to confront.
Okay, so next poll. Loyalist violence, is it worth the risk? Yes or no? And Sam, you said that already when you've raised this point. Some people accuse you of scaremongering, and it's not, a viable prospect. I mean, do you think would it take much to frighten people in the South that they would buy into that and think, damn, this could really happen? And even if they were afraid it would happen, would they think it's worth the risk? What's your assessment there?
It's very understandable that lots of people look at this logically, as I'm sure everybody in this room is a very logical person, and says, you know what, they would have no hope of winning. So why would they try? I mean, it would be pointless. I mean, a few thousand loyalist paramilitaries are going to defeat the British Army, or the Irish Army, supported, if necessary, by the UN, or whatever it might be. This is ludicrous. I mean, this is pie in the sky stuff. The danger of that is that it is historically illiterate. When Ulster resisted Home Rule, it wasn't that it expected to keep all of Ireland out. It was something that ultimately it was partially successful in terms of those 6 counties, but it was a sense of this is the last stand and this is the noble thing to do. 1916, the rebels didn't expect to win and didn't win. This is something that is not about whether you think you're going to win or lose. And so when it comes to loyalism, one of the difficulties here is that, and I think, on the counter-argument here is that while we should absolutely take this incredibly seriously, we shouldn't think that it's an insurmountable problem that can't be addressed through careful planning. So I said that the Irish Army has ludicrously low numbers of soldiers in comparison to loyalist paramilitaries. Forget the debate about neutrality. Set that aside. Forget NATO. Forget anything beyond Ireland's borders. If you're serious about Irish unity, you ought to be serious about building up the Irish Armed Forces to have a credible deterrent to any potential person or persons who would want to create violence. If you don't do that, it's a sitting open goal. You're saying to people who are not thinking in moral terms, who are not thinking in anything other than, can we stop this by whatever means we can find? Here we are, we're vulnerable, we're
So
unprotected.
we should prepare for that in the same way we prepare for discussions about integration versus devolution and the economics. Okay, public services, education and health. Let's take the health one first. We're often told people in the north will not give up the NHS. I also keep hearing about how the NHS is on its knees. So, do health for me then, for and against.
Well, both those things are true, and people can be very contradictory about these things.
Yeah.
This, I think, is the clearest example of where the data says that what lots of people believe is significantly out of date. So the health data on both sides of the border is very difficult to compare. It's gathered in different ways, different time frames, different ways of measuring things. It's really difficult to compare. However, to me, as a journalist, as a layperson looking into this, the most convincing thing that says that the Republic now has a better outcomes health system, I'm not saying a better health system, but a better outcomes health system, is that people in the Republic live for more than 2 years longer than people in Northern Ireland. Is it credible that an inferior health system would keep people alive for longer? Maybe I've got that wrong, maybe it is. But to me, as a layperson, that is incredibly convincing. The NHS is a magnificent ideal. I have family members who work in it. Obviously, I've used it. I love it. I mean, it is one of the most benignly egalitarian decisions any government in human history has ever made. The idea that, from the top of society to the bottom of society, we're treated the same. People buy into it, literally and metaphorically. But it is absolutely on its knees in Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland has waiting times for treatment that make a mockery of the ethos of the NHS. The NHS says that you get treated free at the point of need. You don't in Northern Ireland. You might get treated in 10 years' time. I talked to a GP several years ago in Belfast who said that at that point, and things have got worse since then, but at that point, parts of Northern Ireland, if you needed a hip replacement, joint replacement, you'd be waiting 10 years for that. Now, you might get it and it might be free. How can you quantify 10 years in agony, probably late in life, time running out, and so the NHS is not working? Now, the counter-argument, and I'm going to keep doing this, apologies about this, but is
no,
that
this is
the
the point
NHS,
of the exercise.
The NHS is almost a national religion for Britain now. It is the thing that unites almost everybody, and even those who don't like it can't come out and say that for the most part. They have to pretend to like it. And so it is something that politically is so important that I think there is a credible argument that it will be fixed at some point. Now that might mean that we pay for some, that might mean that there are elements of it that change in ways that we don't like. Currently we get free prescriptions in Northern Ireland, we didn't used to. Lots of this can be altered in subtle ways that don't necessarily undermine the fundamental ethos of it. And then flipping this round again, to people in the Republic, what do they get out of this? So if you've got a better health system and you live on this side of the border, why would you want us? Why would we make it any better? We'd make it die earlier. The flip side of this is that for people in the Republic, it is also a failing system. It might be keeping people longer alive than in Northern Ireland. That's hardly a great benchmark right now. There is a situation here where Sláintecare is obviously inching forward towards something closer to the NHS-type system, and to win a border poll, I don't think you can do that as a nationalist if you don't have a NHS-type system. It will not be perfectly replicating the NHS, but people on this side of the border will benefit, as well as people in the north from that.
Okay, but what I hear people saying is, and where's Paul McCarthy? You hear Paul? He was telling me at dinner. The idea to a lot of people in the north of having to pay €50 to see your GP is just crazy. They'll just go, no. So, you know, that's a really powerful argument for people.
Well, if you're not used to paying for something and somebody says 50
yes.
quid,
yeah.
you're going to balk at it.
Now, I forgot to give the final result on the loyalists. So 72%, you know, are saying yes. It is worth the risk. Oh,
no, it's saying,
are you worried? I had the wrong question. Are you worried about potential loyalist violence? Thank you. 70%, 72%. So that is a significant concern. Thank you. Okay, now education. So my husband is from Northern Ireland. He's lots of nieces and nephews who have all been through this horrendous system where the 11 plus was abolished. But that just means all they have to do is sit an entrance exam for every single school that they're trying to get into. So we look at that and go, that's crazy. Now, whether you like it or not, the point is these are very, very different systems. Now, do you think people in the north want to abandon that system? Or, you know, what do you think?
So the situation with the 11 plus is just a classic example of how Stormont doesn't work. So Stormont decides, as it's perfectly entitled to, we're getting rid of the 11 plus. Fine. Then it can't decide what will replace it. There isn't an agreement about what will replace it. So what do we get as citizens? We get two tests.
Yeah.
A Catholic one and a Protestant one.
Yeah.
And so for something like 10 or 15 years, that's what we had. As somebody whose daughter just went through, my eldest just went through this test for the first time a few months ago, we've now managed to whittle it down to one. So we're making progress again. And we've also pushed it outside government. So it was controlled by government. Now it's controlled by, effectively, the private sector. So anyway, I'm digressing there. Northern Ireland has a very good education system. The Republic has an excellent education system. So this is not an area of drastic difference, I think.
Right, but is it one of those where we need to decide, is it devolution? Are we keeping both or are we integrating? I think that's what it really gets down to.
Yep. So one of the questions that is central to this is, what form does unity take? So one possibility is that you keep Northern Ireland, at least for a period, maybe for 10, 20 years, maybe forever, and you say, you know what, this is Irish unity, but not the way you thought about it. For Unionists, that might be less discombobulating than the idea of losing everything that their forefathers and mothers have fought for and built and created. It's not perfect, it's got problems, it wasn't what they wanted in 1921, but they've come to like it. They've come to identify with lots of elements of it, the Northern Ireland football team, even the PSNI, the Northern Ireland Civil Service, all of these institutions are familiar. And so if you keep that, it's simpler. It's also simpler for people here who don't want very much disruption. So the wealthy middle classes, the people who are doing well, keep them up there at arm's length, send them a big check and hope that they don't kill each other or riot or whatever it might be. That is quite attractive to some people, I think, potentially. It's difficult, I think, though, for people who are visionaries, for people who look at this and say, this is the most exciting thing we could possibly do. This is creating a new country out of two states that have good things, bad things, all manner of in between. But this is something where we can have a revolution of sorts. Tear up the old order, but without bloodshed. We can do this in a way that hasn't been done very often across the world in history. It's not very exciting to those people to say, you know what, well, it's just sort of the Good Friday Agreement reversed, where instead of the big cheque coming from London, it comes from Dublin, all of those powers stay there. But if there's going to be integration of a more significant nature, even if it's not perfect, you get into really thorny questions about the issue of the Irish language. You get into questions about the Northern Ireland schooling system, which is already very, I think it's fair to say, flabby, because there's so many sectors. So there's integrated, there's state, there's Catholic, there's Irish language, there's some independent schools. It's a very complex picture. But if you're a Northern voter and you're looking at this, I was looking at the prices to send somebody to school in one of the best grammar schools in Belfast, Methody. And I've forgotten now exactly what it was, but it was something like £300 you had to pay. And even that, I think, is sort of means tested. So if you can't pay it, you still get your place, but you're meant to contribute to the sports fund or whatever it might be. To send somebody to a equally good school in Dublin, thousands.
That's $7,000 for one of the normal private schools.
So if you're looking at that from Northern Ireland, The Republic, clearly from the data, has a better education system. And it's interesting that even Paul Givan, very conservative DUP education minister right now, has admitted this, is moving to fix this as he sees it. And so you've got a situation where even unionism now accepts that on this, which once was a great plank of pride in unionism, Northern Ireland is now behind the Republic, and that has implications economically for those people throughout their careers.
Right, but if you take, say, health and education in the South, we have these systems where in health there are private hospitals, there are public hospitals. In education we have this system of multiple different kinds of patronage for schools, still mostly Catholic, which a lot of people object to, and that there should be more divestment. You're describing the different kinds of schools in the North. The point being that if you can't merge and have a single system in either jurisdiction, how do you even begin to merge them North and South in both education and health? I mean, from my perspective, I just think it's overwhelming, and unachievable, and we will simply end up with devolved, and everybody carries on the way they are now. And therefore, what's the point of it all? Yeah.
Let me try to persuade you.
Okay.
So yeah. Already we're in a situation where there is creeping convergence in health particularly. It's limited. Congenital heart surgery in Dublin is centralised on an all-island basis. That was done under a unionist health minister. It wasn't seen as controversial, seen as something that was practical, would help kids, and people accepted it. It hasn't been remotely controversial. Altnagelvin Cancer Centre treats people from this county as well as from the west of Northern Ireland. That is happening and probably will accelerate through not so much choice as the collapse of certain services, where the only way to keep them going is to organise them, particularly in the border regions. So that is going to happen, I think, regardless. Now, how that's paid for, how people are billed, etc., will be complicated. I'm not suggesting anything other than that. It would be simpler if it was one jurisdiction and you were doing that on an all-island basis, which again comes back to the benefit of planning, I suppose, in a single jurisdiction. But if you're in a situation where health and education have flipped around, and the South now has the better systems. For a lot of people in the centre ground in Northern Ireland, the people who will swing this border poll potentially one way or the other whenever it comes, the swing voters, which never existed until very recently in any significant numbers, unless there's a good reason not to do it, that's a very persuasive case. So if you're going to live longer, if your kids are going to get a better education, if they're going to have better prospects in the job market, if they're going to be better off in terms of the economy, if they like Ireland's view of the world, its place in the world, in the EU, an expansionist, outward-looking, more liberal type of country, that's very attractive to a lot of people. And so then the question, I think, looping back to where we were a minute ago, comes down to if that is fundamentally better, and you could prove that, which you won't be able to, but if you could scientifically prove this is better than this, but in between this lies death for somebody. Mm-hmm. At what point is that acceptable? So is it 5 people killed, 10 people injured, legs lost? At what point? That's a very crude way of simplifying what is a very complex issue. We can't exactly know that, obviously. But if those people don't believe this has been worked out, I don't believe in Northern Ireland they'll vote for it.
So on working things out, and I still want to come to culture, but since you've raised that, in the attempt to work things out before the holding of a poll, what benefit is there in the unionist side taking part in any kind of negotiations?
Very little.
Yeah. So, because then they're giving into the premise of the question.
Yep.
So how would you see that process evolve?
So, I mean, the challenge for unity campaigners, for the Irish government, for academics, for anybody who's interested in this, in trying to gauge unionist reactions about propositions, what about federalism, what about having, the Shannon installment, whatever it might be, is difficult in circumstances where the vast majority of unionists won't engage. Some will, but they're not going to be representative, so how useful really are they if they're the very liberal types who are prepared to do this? I think that's almost an insurmountable problem, and so I think all that can be done is set forward a proposition. You can get a good sense of what is acceptable to these people by speaking to people who are more liberally minded, but have a sense of what their fellow unionists of a harder line disposition might think about something. You can get a sense of that, put forward a proposition, and test it. The difficulty is, I think, that if you get to a situation where we have two border polls, where you've got a vote for, in principle, Irish unity, but then you're going to work out the details in negotiation with unionists after they've lost. So you say, look, they're not going to have any incentive to hasten their own demise. They're not going to help you win by giving you a better proposition. Of course they're not. But after they've lost, bring them in at that point. Then they have a good incentive to do it. The difficulty there is that you've already decided it has to happen. So
you're back to the Brexit. Yeah. Okay, let's do culture.
Can I say one final thing about this? So for sceptical unionists looking at this and saying, how can we know we'd be treated fairly in a united Ireland? And some people here might think that's an absurd thing. I mean, modern Ireland is not a sectarian state that's persecuting Protestants or, locking people up because of their Orange Order membership or whatever it might be. Of course not. But people's perceptions of this are very strong and they go back a very long way. I think for a unionist looking at this, the most persuasive person who sums this up and embodies this himself is Drew Harris. Drew Harris is not just a Northern Protestant. He's a former RUC officer. He's a former RUC Special Branch officer. He's not just that, he's a former RUC Special Branch officer who liaised with MI5. He was at the heart of the British security apparatus in Northern Ireland. And this state entrusted its national security to this man. They didn't do that to draw from it the implication that I am drawing, that shows that Ireland has moved on. No state does this to tick a diversity box. This is too important. They did it because they believed he was the right man for the job. Whether he was or he wasn't is irrelevant in this instance. The fact he was a Protestant from Northern Ireland, even with an RUC background, didn't hold him back. And I think that says an awful lot, much more than words would say. And
yet, in 1914, when the Unionists said home rule would be Rome rule, they were right.
Well, that's what Mary Lou MacDonald says now.
Yeah.
Says they were right.
Yeah, they said they were right, So, I know legitimate fears and all of that, and those primary schools still are in the control of the Catholic Church. We have private hospitals still in control of the Catholic Church. Fine, we've repealed the 8th. We've had same-sex referendum. Officially, the Catholic Church is still in control of an awful lot of key factors in the state. Okay, let's do culture briefly. The flag, the anthem, the language. So hit on those three. Should we keep our flag? The flag of Ireland, the tricolour is green and orange with peace in the middle. Is that not exactly what the flag should be?
So, it's a great question, and it's a fine ideal. So the idea that there's orange, that there's green, that there's peace in between the two, magnificent, isn't it? Who could possibly object to that? Well, an awful lot of people. But think about it like this. Isn't the Union flag a magnificent flag? A flag that brings in the Cross of St. Patrick, the cross, I'm going to get this wrong now, the Cross of St. George, the Scottish Saltire, which shows the diversity of this nation, Irishness, Englishness, Welshness, if that's the correct term, and Scottishness. Isn't that magnificent? Who could possibly object? An awful lot of people. Symbols are not about logically looking at something and saying, you know what, is it a nice design, or does the design reflect something nice and positive? That's not the reality of this. For many people in Northern Ireland, the fact that the tricolour was draped over IRA coffins, the fact that it was the flag of the partitionist state on the other side of the border, which imposed tariffs on them after 1921, all of the stuff that happened there is too much. For a lot of nationalists in Northern Ireland, the Union flag is associated with things that are completely beyond ever being acceptable. Bloody Sunday, empire, conquest, all of the stuff that encapsulates the worst of Britishness to those people is wrapped up in that one symbol. It's not that the symbol is a particular problem, it's that encapsulates something that if there's a new country, there obviously has to be a new flag.
Let's do a quick show of hands on this. I don't have a Slido poll for that. Who's willing to change the flag? Okay, a lot of people. And who's not? Just to see if we get a... Okay, I think we can say it's carried to change the flag. I'm not sure how representative this audience is. The anthem. Personally, I think our anthem's a bloody awful, moany anthem. I wouldn't mind changing it at all. And the rugby anthem's working out grand, isn't it?
Well,
Okay, maybe we need a poll on that one. Right. So the anthem. For and against.
Well, the Irish national anthem has a much better tune than the rugby anthem. That's certainly true.
Yeah.
However, I think that when you look at these symbolic issues, if you're going to create a new country and you're serious about this,
same as the
and
flag,
you're serious about showing respect to people, whatever the reason for their belief that this doesn't represent them, it doesn't. You can't force somebody to say, this represents me if it doesn't. And so therefore, if you're serious about saying to those people that you're going to be welcomed, you're going to be included, you're going to be treated fairly, you're going to be respected, how can those people believe that if a piece of cloth can't be changed?
Yeah.
If a piece of music can't be changed? I mean, these are ultimately symbolic issues that don't really fundamentally matter in people's daily lives. There are things that do matter in people's lives culturally, and things like the Irish language in schools, things like, there are lots of...
Yeah, but you know what, on that, was it you were saying to me that John Hume used to say you can't eat a flag, you know? You can't eat a language either. And I've written in my column complaining about the Irish Language Act in the South, which says that 20% of all public sector employees by, I think, 2030 should be proficient in the use of the Irish language, which I think is quite discriminatory. You know, and they've already had to abandon it for the Gardaí anyway because it's just not practical. So when people are fighting over a sign in Irish at Belfast train station, like, you know, they're going to tear themselves apart over language, you know, which you can't eat. So give me the for and against on that.
Yeah,
what is the position of the Irish language in a new state?
Well, let me bring in a third issue to this, which is also relevant, because ultimately all of these symbolic issues are almost in a block where the arguments for and against are very similar. So the idea of Ireland rejoining the Commonwealth.
Yeah.
This is the thing that surprises me most. So after the coronation in London, I was over to cover the coronation. I wrote a column for the Sunday Independent saying I was going back to my hotel at Waterloo Station, and the soldiers were parading back from, you know, having done their ceremonial duties throughout the day. And there was this one detachment of soldiers, and Ed Burke is here, will probably know much more about the detail of this, but they were made up, obviously, of Commonwealth nations. And they had all, it was really obvious, I mean, I don't know much about it, but they had all different uniforms. There were black soldiers, there were white soldiers, there were Asian soldiers. They were all different, and it was a very unusual thing to see. It was a really striking, arresting image. And I didn't know that this even was a thing. And I wrote something saying, you know what, if there is a united Ireland, maybe the next king or queen, or the one after that, that's coronated, there'll be members of the Irish Defence Forces in there. And people weren't entirely enthusiastic about it, let's say.
Were you trending? Were you trending on Twitter that day?
And what surprised me about that was this. At the time when Ireland departed from the Commonwealth, the issue, if I've got this correctly, I am now talking off the top of my head, was that the head of state had to be the head of the Commonwealth. So that was then dispensed with. So that is no longer an issue in terms of what was presented at the time. So it's a bit like what somebody said earlier about Sean McBride, no relation, I should say, who had objected to the idea of joining NATO because the North was being occupied, as he saw it, by Britain, which was part of NATO, and they weren't going to join. No, that's not the reason. There's another reason. So it's a bit like that. Another reason has come up. So it's seen as embodying empire, as embodying all of the ugly bits of the past of Britishness, and Ireland doesn't want to be part of that. And yet it's purely symbolic. There is no in any way, diminution of Irish sovereignty in the way there is by joining the European Union. Very genuinely a significant balance, you know, for and against, and worked out, yes, this is clearly in favour of Ireland being there. It's for Ireland's national interest. The Commonwealth is just purely about saying you're in this club. I'm not sure it actually makes a great deal of difference to Unionists in the North, but what they do see is the debate about it, and they see that if something this irrelevant and this unimportant to them is completely anathema, I mean, it's not even possible to discuss it rationally with lots of people, then they think, well, you know what about things like people who are former, you know, members of the British Army being treated fairly, etc., and they fear that there'd be some sort of retribution towards them.
Okay, I'm going to do a final Slido poll. So this is on the substantive issue, as you say. So how would you vote if a border poll was held tomorrow? For, against, or undecided? And now I'm going to go to the audience for I get all your comments and questions, and then at the end I'm going to have one more question for you, a show of hands of my own. So how would you vote if a border poll?
If this doesn't strongly lean towards undecided, I'm going to feel like I've failed here.
So how are we doing? For? The suspense. So a lot of undecideds. Now, of course, if that was a poll on the day, it would be carried, you know, if the undecideds didn't come out. So that's quite interesting. Okay, so it's your turn. Who'd like to get in, ask a question or make a point? Great, okay? Or here? And here. So I'll take 3 together, okay? So here, and then if we can have a mic down here in the front, I'll come to you in the second round, and then you here, okay? So, right, tell us who you are first.
Yes, hello, I'm James Tersh, a student at Queen's University in Belfast. Sam, I listened to your interview with Micheál Martin, and you said that it wouldn't exactly be great for Irish unity activists. It's not what they perhaps wanted to hear, some of the things he said. Do you think it is an issue that Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil do not have established organisations in the north? Thinking politically, cynically, Sinn Féin have a massive voter base there. Does that maybe play into their minds going ahead for the future, politics of the country?
Okay, that's a good one. Now, and this man here, can we have a mic here at the front? Sorry. A nice, succinct question, James. Everybody else take note, including you now. Right, okay, go for it.
Turnbull, 2 years ago this week, Tommy Gorman was here the last year of his life. I'd bought his book and talked about it. He reckoned there wouldn't be a border poll because of the disabled cars, disability cars, the self-interest of financial situations. And also, I suppose some of us didn't have a mobile phone, so not a totally democratic vote tonight.
Yeah. And your question is?
Well, it's about the disabled car situation, but it's
okay.
In the north.
Great. And now this man here, the sports jacket. And is that a tricolour badge you've on
it
here?
It is.
Okay, all right, okay. So,
I didn't wear it just for this.
Okay, go for it.
Joe Musgrave, an aspect of this I'm interested in, because it's quite insular so far, in the story of the negotiations and peace, the role of the US and the EU has been quite important. So as their kind of willingness and bandwidth to be involved in these problems globally seems to be waning, how would you see their role in all of this debate and the pros and cons of their involvement or not?
I think that's a great question. Okay, so we'll take James's first. Sinn Féin is the all-Ireland political party, and Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael totally inactive in the north.
I mean, look, there's a very, it's not in any way an original thought, but there's a very long-standing truism in Northern Ireland that Sinn Féin is the worst advocate for Irish unity in terms of persuading undecideds, and the DUP is the worst advocate for the union in terms of persuading undecideds. They're the biggest parties, they're what people want, but they're not very good at convincing people who aren't already in their tents. There was a Fine Gael branch at Queen's, because the guy who, I've forgotten his name, but the guy who was in it used to contact me sometimes. But yes, there was that idea with the SDLP that there would be this link up. I mean, it simply didn't work. And there is an argument. I mean, actually, it's interesting that you raise it, because I haven't heard this raised for a very long time, but there is an argument that if Ireland as a nation is serious about this, how can you not have at least some sort of alliance with, a party in the north, or at least some sort of representation or person who's there regularly? I mean, Sinn Féin don't like the idea that Westminster rules Northern Ireland in some areas, but they still send somebody on rotation to be over in London. I mean, you can be pragmatic.
But doesn't it show how deep partition is embedded, that actually it simply doesn't seem feasible for Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael to go north? Even though Sinn Féin were successful coming south. Like, it wouldn't work.
Well, it's massive. I mean, look, whatever you think about partition, you might be the most hardline Republican in West Belfast. The reality is that you have grown up in a jurisdiction which is shaped by the border. You listen to the BBC, you drive on roads that are marked in miles an hour, you use the Royal Mail. I mean, it is in every aspect of your life.
The architecture, everything.
And some of that people will dislike, they'll actively oppose, whatever it might be. Lots of it they're not even aware of. The Met Office, I mean, there are so many elements of this that are just part of the reality.
Now, Joe's question, I think there's a lot of very casual assumptions, not just about the row over what Ireland, the South will be able to pay in the North. America will pay for it. Europe will pay for it. They'll be all wanting to get involved. I'm sorry, their interests have shifted east as far as the EU is concerned. I think the South has burned political capital in the EU. America's obviously very busy with some other stuff going on. Can we presume that we will get support from the US and EU, or what kind of role would they play?
So on this question, it's an excellent question. On this question, I think the balance tilts very firmly in favour of 4. in that, despite all of those issues that you cite, these are blocs that are more sympathetic to the idea of Irish unity, and which have significant, in American terms, has significant Irish expat populations. Even Britain has an extraordinary number now of senior figures in public life, in private sector. Morgan McSweeney is the most obvious, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, who are from Ireland, from the Republic. And so there are people, it's no longer a situation where the Irish in Britain are digging tunnels and building roads. They're in boardrooms, they're in government, they're in Downing Street, and that level of goodwill after a vote for unity would be very significant. And one other thing, Enda Kenny, I think, here, if it was on this platform a few years ago, said that he had negotiated with the EU that if there is a vote for unity, Northern Ireland automatically rejoins the EU. And that's a very significant thing, not just because it helps people win a border poll, but because once that happens, the EU is bound to make a success of it. It doesn't want a basket case out here. It wants to show that it can work.
That's a good point.
And there's a lot that it can do to help.
That's a great point. Okay, next. I'll go to the back of the room maybe this time. Yeah, so down there, so beside you.
Oh, sorry, the cars. The cars. Let me answer. So,
the cars,
I think what Tommy was, what he was referring to was DLA cars, people who get cars based on their disability, and there's an awful lot of those in Northern Ireland, and I'm taking it that it was a cipher for the wider benefit system in Northern Ireland. The reality is that Ireland is now an incredibly wealthy state, and some benefits are significantly more generous in the Republic than they are in Northern Ireland. So some of this, I'm not sure what the situation is with cars, so I'm going to disappoint you, but some of this actually, people's perception and the reality is actually out of date.
Now, I'm going to take the man with the beard standing at the back first, and then I'll come to you then, okay? I have the very focals on. I think that's a beard down there. So,
how are you? Paul Doherty, I'm a local in Donegal. You talked a lot about the institutions and the differences between the institutions, but I would like to get your opinion on the difference in the psychology between people from Northern Ireland that have lived through an entire lifetime of partition and separation and the people in the South. And I'll give you an example. People from Northern Ireland insist on driving onto a beach. People from the South would never drive on the beach. People from Northern Ireland love to throw the rubbish out the window of their car. People from the South would never throw the rubbish out the window.
I don't know about that one now, but anyway.
Do you believe there's a fundamental difference in attitude that will take generations to change?
Yeah, I think that is a super question. I really, really do. And I'll elaborate on it. And then where's the man in the middle now? Yourself there. Yeah.
Liam Mulligan, Letterkenny.
How are you, Liam?
Now, I'm actually holding up, people won't really see this obviously on a phone, but it's a symbol of loyal Letterkenny.
Okay.
It's like a UVF badge with Letterkenny underneath it on a little water jug. But it's about the question I raised in the survey, the question of a British-Irish identity in a united Ireland. I want to make a slight diversion first on the issue of where the border should be if there's still devolution in United Ireland. And that was Betty Holmes of the Donegal Action for Cancer was on a delegation to the department in Dublin. And she was asked by someone there, I hope it wasn't anyone senior, why she was coming to Dublin rather than to Stormont.
Oh, right, okay.
Right. It's a real issue because there's still a lot of cancer. There's some cancer treatment in Alton-Galvin, but there's still a lot of cancer treatment we have to go to Galway for, which is much more difficult for us to get to than Dublin.
Yes.
Because there's no Western corridor.
Right.
But my mother talked about growing up in Letterkenny in the 30s, where the constitutional question was out of the way. And while there were bitter people, as they called them, on both sides, you grew up, you lived beside them, you played with them, you worked with them, and this was in a town with 30 to 40% Protestant population, the biggest Protestant population in a town in the 26 counties at the time. So there was a change in the identity and the acceptance of the identity with unification. We won't say they were all happy with it, but there was a change. But I would like to make international comparisons. I have a friend, died earlier this year, from Alsace.
Oh, yes.
He was the first generation of genuinely French Alsatians. and his funeral was from the Lutheran Church in Adelaide Road. His grandfather, in any way a Nazi at times, never became French, never identified as French. On the other hand, he is fully French, although he was called the Sale Boche by people in the south. You would think he was French. You wouldn't have any doubts on the fact. And he didn't have any doubts on the fact. On the other hand, I have a friend who's an ethnic Hungarian from a Hungarian majority area of Transylvania. And she has no doubt that she is Hungarian. She is not Romanian.
It's that issue of stranded ethnic minorities when new borders were formed. So we'll address that. I'll take one more. Let me see now. Oh, yeah, actually, now you were in it. Try it. It's the lady with the headscarf here. And I'll come to you on the next one, right? We've loads of time. We've another 20 minutes for questions. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I'm not that afraid of loyalist violence in the event of United Ireland, because I know from experience that loyalists are frail and sickly and frequently stupid. What frightens me, and I can say that because I'm a Southern Protestant.
Right.
I'm allowed to say that, but what I'm concerned about is what about Republicans? Because Republicans are not. I don't think they'd be interested in a United Ireland being governed by, say, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, who have put them into the Special Criminal Court and put them into the big prison with the army in front of it.
In Portlaoise.
Portlaoise,
yes.
Have persecuted them politically and been very harsh on them.
So you say there could be a threat of Republican violence in the run-up to a border poll to try and intimidate people?
Not even that.
No?
Afterwards, because they seem to be the kind of the missing ingredient no one is thinking about. Loyalist violence, that doesn't really concern me. But Republicans, I think, are much better organised. They're kind of they're cannier.
Yeah.
They have much better morale.
Okay, I get Sam to talk about that. Now, take the first one, psychology. And you see, people often come and say, but it was fine in Germany, right? But Germany was so different. Mary Daly, the historian, is fantastic on this. It was partitioned and reunified within people's lifetimes. So it was only 40 years, was it 45 years? There was no stranded ethnic minority. There was no problem about the constitution. It was basically an annexation. Now that came back to bite them in other ways and still is, I think, today with the AFD. But we have been partitioned for over 100 years, and there really are those cultural differences, and we can laugh at them in a superficial way, but they are quite profound. We're different countries. Some people don't want to hear that, but we are different countries. And then that fits into the second question about identity. Is there any such thing as a British-Irish identity? Can there ever be? Are you either one or the other at the end of the day?
So, let me just say, it's the first time I've heard that it's people from Northern Ireland who are mostly guilty of throwing rubbish out the window. Certainly they do, but I didn't know that was a particularly northern pursuit.
Yeah.
We do have a rather deeper problem on both sides of the island, which we haven't touched on, and that is our neglect of the environment. There's been lots of discussion today about the need for rapid planning, for getting infrastructure through. Lots of that's absolutely sensible. Some of the planning stuff is nuts in terms of how long things can go round and round, and that's not unique to us. HS2 in England has been a complete joke in terms of how that has drained money without building anything. But the environment in Northern Ireland, where I'm from, Lough Neagh is now basically a toxic toilet for half of the year. That's where 40% of Northern Ireland's drinking water comes from. We've got a Stormont executive which says one of its key priorities is cleaning that up, which is actually making it worse through its other policies. And there are a whole series of elements of this that in time might seem much starker than some of the issues around language and Commonwealth and other elements here, particularly to migrant communities. And the thing that we haven't touched on is that the people who might swing this, and sorry, I'm completely digressing from the question, apologies, I'm really acting like a politician here, but the migrant communities have every bit as much of a right to have a say in this as anybody whose family has been here for hundreds or thousands of years. This is their home, this is their future, and they will be involved in this. But while they don't have the baggage of the past that my ancestors have, and lots of our ancestors have, or that we get from our ancestors rather, they have sometimes naivety about the forces that have shaped this island. So there are positives and there are negatives. They could be persuaded this way or that way without knowing the implications of what happened historically when people did similar things in the past. So there are lots of elements of this that are important. I apologise that didn't answer the question at all.
Well, look, but if you take half of Southerners had taken no day trips across the border at all. That came up in the ARN's, the Irish Times survey. Like, there is a genuine, deep disconnect.
It's remarkable.
Yeah.
It's a tiny island. It has, since 1998, been pretty peaceful. The border is open. There's no, passport control. There's nothing to stop you. It's cheaper in the north. You can get more bang for your buck. There's all sorts of reasons why you might want to come. And yet far more Southerners go south than Southerners who go north.
Yeah, so 65% of Northerners came south. I think that enterprise train is a big part of that. But on the identity, could there be a British-Irish identity, or, will people for a couple of generations be like, your father, your friend's father, who was German, and it took the next generation for him to consider himself French?
I mean, I think for different people, both of those things will happen. Not everybody thinks the same way, even in a particular community, and we stereotype people necessarily sometimes because we have to simplify these things to try to categorise things. But one of my best friends from university is from Letterkenny, and his family are Protestant. And he's utterly Irish. I mean, it doesn't cross his mind that he's remotely unionist. He's absolutely Irish. He's hoping that Donegal, I'm sure, win in the final. He supports the Irish football team. I mean, there is absolutely no question. But for generations before that, that was probably weaker, and so over time that potentially happens. But there will be other people who absolutely still see themselves as British, or simply in more cases simply left the Republic and came to Northern Ireland.
I'm interested in people's thoughts on health and education. Is that Ruan? Did you have it? No. So I'll come to you just in one sec. You asked a question earlier. Is that Francie there? Is it? Okay. So Francie Malloy is here in the second row. Here. And then there was a man there behind you, Francie. Yeah, you. So you can be set next. And then who was over here that I spotted? I'll take you in the blue jumper, and I'll go down that end of the room for the next round, okay? So, brief questions. Thank you, Francie.
Francie Malloy.
Yeah.
Just to clarify something, Sinn Féin didn't go south.
Okay, point taken. Point taken.
The thing about the whole idea of fear of Republicans in the future, Republicans will have achieved the United Ireland. So that is the goal within that. The makeup of the United Ireland, what form it takes, whether it's federalism, whatever the case may be, I would be an advocate of actually saying that the Assembly should be maintained in an all-Ireland structure and devolved from Dublin instead of from London, and in that way actually accommodate unionism within the new structures within an all-Ireland structure.
But then what changes in the north then, Francie? It just goes on, except, I think Dublin is in charge.
I think it would become very clear after a short period of time that wasn't needed any longer, but the transition across from one to the other. Like in local government, we brought in a system of the hunt, which allowed the power to be across the different parties, independents, unionists, nationalists, whatever the case may be, that each one would get their turn in the positions of power, if there is power at all.
But sorry for cutting across you, but I felt like, with the power sharing in Stormont, that it prevented people from moving on and evolving, because everyone is still tied down into their identities. 30 years after Good Friday, it's still unionist, it's still Republican. And when do you move on to left, right, conservative, liberal, those kind of changes? And you can't do that with power sharing.
Well, I think the particular type of power sharing we have, because it's forced in power sharing within the Assembly. But it wouldn't have worked otherwise it would just be direct rule. Because direct rule now, or one-party rule now, would be Sinn Féin, which would be a reverse situation to what it was at the time of the Good Friday Agreement. But it still wouldn't work within that situation, because every time, and it's the same thing as the threat of loyalism. I used to have discussions with Mo Mullen before Labour came into government, and we weren't supposed to be talking to the British government at the time, but I used to meet Mo Mullen in cafes early in the mornings and things like that, and we would discuss the whole issue of loyalism, the whole fear of what loyalism would do if they actually tried to bring in the Good Friday Agreement. And I said, don't worry about loyalism, we've already dealt with loyalism. They already are going to accept the Good Friday Agreement. The Good Friday Agreement to loyalism was near enough the same as the United Ireland, because they saw it as the way to United Ireland.
And do you not think devolution is a cod? That a United Ireland should be 32 county republic, elect TDs to the Dáil in Dublin and run it as one country.
Well, if that's the way that people decide, but I think if you throw it open and say, well, it's up for the people to decide what form of government will take, that if it is a transition period, that you use the Assembly in that transition to accommodate unionism within the Northern Ireland, and that they actually test out whether Dublin would actually give them the authority that they need. But at the end of the day, Stormont is only a glorified county council, regional assembly. It's not a government. Stormont was prorogued 50 years ago. So like people who get carried away with the idea that we're in government or a programme for government are a bit of delusion in themselves.
Now, the man behind, will you pass that mic back? There you go. It's the man with the glasses. Thanks.
The room is filled with men with glasses.
I get a few women in. Tell us who you are now. I don't know you.
My name's Neil. I've forgotten. It's very hard work, all this. Neil McCann's my name. And the question is whether there's a reason to revisit the provisions of the Northern Ireland Act or the Good Friday Belfast agreements.
Okay.
Requiring, or as to the terms on which a border poll would be called. So, as things stand, the Secretary of State, if he or she is of the opinion that the border poll would be carried, then that triggers it. Now, I mean, technically speaking, after dinner some evening, the Secretary of State might tell his cat. But he had put the record button on his phone.
Especially if he's Nigel Farage.
Well, odd things can happen.
Yeah.
But also, if the border poll is called according to the law as currently enacted and is carried, then that's the end of it for the unionist position. It is not revisited. But if from the nationalist position it is lost, then it will be revisited again, I think, in its 7th.
So what would you change it to?
Oh God, I suppose, are you asking me the question?
So, but you think we should review it? But you're saying you think we should review it, that it's just too fudgy now, it's on the whim of one man or woman, and God knows who that might be in 5 or 10 years' time.
Yes, and I also know, because I asked somebody that was involved in the negotiations, why did they put such a loose requirement in it? And he said, well, we didn't want everybody to know, so we didn't draw loads of attention to it.
In the blue sweatshirt here yourself, and then I'll take another one while I'm doing the round. Yes, so you can be next, right? Okay, so blue jumper.
Ross Neal, Northern Protestant, living in Dublin. So hopefully I offer more to the Southern state than rubbish out of.
You're an ethnic minority. We will protect you here.
My question sort of on that theme is that the debate down here is often framed in terms of what the South would have to give up in order to take on the North.
Yeah.
Did you, Sam, identify any areas where the North could benefit the South? For instance, one thing might be there's a small but not a substantial defence industry in the North that there isn't in the South, where that could be beneficial. Belfast taking some economic pressure off Dublin, for example. Ideas like that, where the North might actually.
That's a great point, because we have framed it the other way. And now this man here, yourself there, kind of a grey shirt there. Yeah. And then I'll get down to, no, I'm the blue shirt here. I'm not wearing it today. And I'll go down then that part of the room then afterwards. Great, tell us who you are.
John Roden.
Hello, John.
I was using Google to plot my route up to Glenties.
So did I. Where did you come from? Where?
From Dublin.
Right.
But I was a bit dismayed to discover when it reached the border that it told me that I was leaving Ireland.
Oh, yes. Well, you see.
It seems to me that we should change the name of the Republic to the Republic of Ireland and share the name Ireland with.
We will get on to Google and lobby them about that. Sam, should the Belfast Agreement be reviewed? Do you want to say something about Google?
I will answer that question before I forget about it. So I was also using Google to get here, and it led me astray up through a bog somewhere outside Oma. I have no idea where I was. Up this very narrow one-track road, and then suddenly it said, you need to U-turn. What are you talking about? I mean, I've driven this 10 miles, single road, there's nowhere I could have gone astray. I'm here. And I stopped, pulled in, looked at this, and I realised that we got to the border, and it couldn't cope with this. So then I drove on and then it immediately said, carry on for another 5 miles or whatever it was. So, yeah, I mean, look, and actually the issue of how we refer to things was something that we had to think about in the book, because we're trying not to go out of our way to offend people. Lots of people read this from all sorts of backgrounds, but we're also trying to be clear about what we're talking about. And the word Ireland is really unclear. So what does it refer to? Does it refer to the Irish state, as in the 26-county state? Does it refer to the entire island? Does it refer to the Irish nation? Talking about bringing in the diaspora to vote for presidential elections. I mean, it's a very ambiguous word, and so in trying to be clear, the best that I could come up with was Republic and Northern Ireland, or North and South, and obviously South is a ludicrous thing when parts of Donegal are more northerly than parts of Northern Ireland, but at least you know what you're talking about there. Talking about Ireland, it just is not clear to the reader sometimes. Anyway, sorry, I digress.
So, Belfast Agreement, should we review the terms? Because it does seem a bit dodgy. I mean, I understand why they agreed to it at the time, but the Secretary of State looks into his or her heart and goes, do you know what, I think I'll have a referendum. Like, it's mad, isn't it?
Well, I'm not going to say it's mad, but the curious element of this is that while lots of people assume that the Secretary of State, whoever that might be, would obviously consult the Prime Minister, consult the Cabinet, talk to the Irish government, have widespread consultations before taking this momentous and really history-defining decision, potentially. The way the law is written, the gentleman is absolutely correct. A mad or bad or feckless Secretary of State, and we've had some of all of those, could simply wake up and say, I'm doing this. For whatever reason, they might have fallen out with the Prime Minister. They might themselves feel passionately that they want to confirm
the UK is broke and goes, we can't afford this anymore, we're ditching it.
And so if they did that, I actually don't think it's wise to go back and revisit this, because the Good Friday Agreement had a unique democratic legitimacy. The people voted for it in referenda, both sides of the border. Once you start tinkering with that, I know it was tinkered with at St Andrews, but really fundamental surgery in the most controversial area I think is problematic. But the difficulty is that if the Secretary of State does that, some people might say, look, it can be overturned in the courts, they can say this is perverse, or the Prime Minister can wade in and just countermand them. That, as far as I can see, I'm not a lawyer, but that does not work. The law says the Secretary of State has the power. And actually in the British system it's even more complicated, because this Secretary of State is a term that refers in law in Britain to any Secretary of State. So the Defence Secretary could decide, I'm calling this. It says of Northern Ireland.
And you reminder that in the Good Friday Agreement, the description of how a referendum should be held in the North is in there about 6 or 7 times, and there is no reference at all to any referendum in the South. It's simply about, well, the Government of Ireland might do this. So I think that's quite interesting as well, people's expectations. Now, quickly on how can the North benefit the South?
Yep. So,
briefly now, because we're at 9:30, but
it's
I want to
question.
take a few more questions.
We've touched on this in some ways in terms of the inequality in the South, in terms of recreating it as a better society, as a more equal society. That's not just in the interests of people who are at the bottom rung of the ladder. That's actually in the interest of stability. Some people in business on this side of the border have been saying, to my surprise, that they're concerned about the social contract, about the fact that too many people seem to be losing too much and too many people have too much. History is littered with revolutions where people feel that they're not getting things right. I'm not suggesting that Ireland's on the brink of a revolution. Of course it's not. But we've seen backlashes against migrants. We've seen rioting in Dublin. We've seen things that we didn't expect to see. The world's a very fast place. But one final thing. At a crude level, the Republic gains a lot of territory. And that matters. It also gains a lot of population. So the Republic would increase its territory by 20%. Its population would go up by 35%. Ireland would have a bigger population than Norway, Denmark, Finland or Singapore. That means more say in the world, more clout democratically, diplomatically. You might say it's marginal, but it is something.
Okay, so one more round. Now, a lady in the red blouse here, and then I'll take 2 from the furthest back of the room because I've been neglecting them, okay? So there's a man there, another man with glasses. I'm going to be fired. There's a man on the other side with no glasses after. So, red blouse.
Right, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Bernadine O'Sullivan. Just on the question of identity. The Good Friday Agreement recognises that people in Northern Ireland can identify as Irish, British or both. Okay? I've just 3 very short comments and then...
Very short.
They're very short. The first one was to do with the first poll, which was about the cost. Would you give a lot or a little? Well, what's embedded in my head is the 10 billion that John Fitzgerald report about 2 years ago. However, the most recent one, not just by John Doyle himself, but by DCU and the University of Ulster, put it at around 3 billion. So I just wondered then how many people in this audience were aware of the new report that has come out in the last number of days, putting it at 3 billion.
And do you believe the 3 billion now? Seriously?
I actually believe what Leo Varadkar said shortly after the John Fitzgerald report. A couple of months afterwards, Leo Varadkar said, well, I don't think all of the factors were put into it. In other words, he was doubting the factors, okay?
Now, I'll let you do your second of your 3 points, but then I'll go to somebody else, okay? So pick the best one.
The second of my 2 points are this, and it's to do with once a border poll or unification is brought up, the question of Brexit. There was no preparation. I do not know of anyone who would want a border poll or unification who does not say preparation. And the question was, the title of this is The Case For and Against a United Ireland. Why is Fintan O'Toole not here tonight? Thank you.
Well, I've good news on that. Sam and Fintan are going to do an event in the National Concert Hall on the 30th of November, which I will be chairing. They'll both be there for that. You've been warned. Buy your tickets as soon as they come out. Now, so the man with the glasses here, so there, stand up. I'm looking at, and they can see you, right? Okay,
So, my name's Rory McGowan.
Hi, Rory.
I'm from Monaghan. And,
thoughts and prayers?
Thinking back, and I've raised this a number of times in other fora, the reason the vote for the Good Friday Agreement went so well and the result was accepted is that there was an acknowledgement at the time that a majority in both communities in Northern Ireland was needed. And the vote required was around 72% back then. That was recognised, and I think the vote ended up at 71%. And so before there had been a consensus about what number would represent a majority. And I was just interested to know if that's...
Actually, quickly, I'll put that to you, Sam. Simple majority or qualified majority?
So on this, I'm very clear. There has to be a simple majority. I entirely, Rory, acknowledge what you're saying. I think that a simple majority that's 1,000 votes or 1 vote or even 10,000 votes is disastrous, whichever way it goes. It's a huge problem, but it's the only way that democracy can operate. You cannot have a situation where Republicans were told, give up violence and you'll get a united Ireland if you get it over the line, and then the minute they get close to it, you say, you know what, forget that, we're going to sit it at 70 or 80 or whatever it might be. It's ludicrous. You cannot have a jurisdiction where most people do not want it to exist. It's just unworkable. It's not even, yes, it's desirable to have a big majority one way or the other, whichever way that is, but you cannot have a situation where people want something to happen democratically and you say, sorry, we're changing the rules now that you're getting close to it.
Is it in the Good Friday Agreement if it's simple or qualified? Is it in it?
No, but I think it's implicit in this. There's a very long London University report on this, which sets out lots of the complexity of this, but the public expectation is a simple majority. And while, yes, the Good Friday Agreement was hoped for by David Trimble to get to 70%, the law said 50%, and that's what he needed to get.
Okay, yourself there. And I will come to you. I'm sorry. I get permission from Vince to take a few more, but we're taking you now there. You've got the mic. Stand up.
Hi, thank you. It's Neil here. What impact, if any, will it have in this debate and on the question of British identity in general if Scotland leaves UK first?
Great question. Sam, briefly.
So it's a great question, but one of the things that struck me as I was writing the against chapter in this was that over the last number of years since Brexit, there have been a lot of things that in the popular consciousness and even in very informed circles people took to be pretty likely to happen, if not inevitable. And one of them was that Scotland was likely to go before Northern Ireland. And now that's receding back because the SNP have obviously come upon a crisis which was nothing to do with this in some ways. And so therefore there are lots of possibilities there. If Scotland was to leave, it would be a problem for unionism. There is no way around that. But I don't think that it's determinative either way. For some unionists, it would be something that would cause them to question the future of the entire union. But Northern Ireland unionists' links to Scotland are historic, but for the most part, they're not significant in the present day, beyond going to watch Rangers or a loyalist band coming over to march on the 12th, whatever, which could still continue regardless.
Now, yourself.
Yeah, thanks. Just a couple of points, just coming back.
Is your mic on? Yeah, try again. Yeah. No? Maybe they've cut you off. Maybe the battery went.
I can hear you.
You shout up to me and I'll repeat. I'd say the battery's just gone.
I don't know, you've probably read Seamus Mallon's book, where, and I mean, it's somebody we all admire, where he actually is, advising us that we should be looking for a bigger majority than just that simple majority. And then, just coming back to the issue of the Commonwealth, I'd be interested to see a poll on whether, it's something that we can give.
Well, why don't we do a show of hands?
To the community in Northern Ireland. And the last thing is, the issue of NATO hasn't come up in this conversation. NATO's obviously, the 6 counties is in NATO, and we're dead against it here in the South. And has that come up in your book?
Okay, so quickly, who would join the Commonwealth? Anybody would rejoin the Commonwealth? Fiona wants to rejoin the Commonwealth, okay.
Well, there's someone.
And who would not, no way, join the Commonwealth? Ooh, okay. Sam, brief. NATO. NATO.
Yes, it's touched on. I don't think that on either side of the border this is a critical issue that's going to sway very many votes, but it's very important. And one of the issues here is that from the against element of this, Northern Ireland is plugged into GCHQ and cybersecurity infrastructure, the Five Eyes intelligence network, stuff that might not seem terribly relevant to people's lives, but that's what helps to protect banking, that's what helps to protect your shopping online, all of those things. That's increasingly important in the modern world. Ireland is lagging behind in that, and so there is a vulnerability there. It's not about having, a Rolls-Royce Air Force or anything like that. That's not terribly relevant to this. But what is relevant is that if you're going to leave something of NATO's significance, there needs to be some sort of credible alternative to it, to people who do care about that.
Okay, stand up. Yep.
Sam,
and tell us who you are. Yep, you're on.
Sam, as a Northerner, first of all, I thank you for the contribution you've made to Northern Ireland politics. My question is this. At the turn of the 20th century, Northern Unionists denied the democratic process. In the 1970s, they did that again. Mm-hmm. I have no reason to believe that in 2030, 2040, 2050, they are going to turn Titanic and say, we are no longer British. Do you think they will?
So you mean after a vote for unity?
Yeah.
So I think that this is maybe more complex than that might suggest. While Northern Ireland exists, there is something to defend that is in the Union, that is thoroughly British, that is not just a part of the Union, but is, just yesterday, to give you a tangible example of this, the most senior officer in the Royal Air Force was appointed. He's from Northern Ireland. If you're a unionist, you feel completely plugged into that system. When the Queen dies, they weep, not simply because she's somebody who's famous. They feel an affinity to her. They've gone out and cheered for her in the streets. Once Northern Ireland leaves, if that happens, I think that fundamentally alters. For some people it doesn't. Absolutely. They will still feel affinity to Britain. But the longer that goes on, things like sport have a great ability to cause people to feel a sense of unity. There are other elements of this. Simply travelling around the island more, seeing that actually what did exist in the 1970s, 1980s, when I was growing up, simply does not exist anymore in many cases. That has a very powerful effect.
Mm. Okay, yourself. And I'll take one or two more. We'll call it at 1:45. So yourself.
Okay, thank you. Rich, and I am a councillor from Tipperary. It's a fascinating debate, but the one thing that gives me hope in it is that my 2 children are actually going to college in Northern Ireland, and we'll say my wife, in a sense, is Indian. So I had a hang-up about them coming up to the north, but my wife didn't see it that way. And I must say, since they went there, they don't see any of that kind of history. So it will give you hope that the next generation, their biggest issue sometimes is why we have Vodafone UK, Vodafone O2, the Republic. They're the kind of issues they focus on, not so much the historic.
And that's so important. And Mark Hennessy was making this at a talk I was at before, that there should be more students going north and south learning about each other. So have you a question in that?
The only
That's an
comment
observation.
the fact that student finance is available in the north and not in the south was a big factor for us now. They can borrow for a couple of years and then pay back after they graduate, which you don't have in the south.
Okay, so A woman, can I have a woman? I've had loads of men. Yeah, it's a lady here. Great. Pink pink fleece, front row. No.
I used to work for Humanists UK, the non-religious, and Northern Ireland is a very fast-growing non-religious group. And yet, if they joined with Ireland, the Catholic Church are seen as a bit more strident than the Church of England, which is in very fast demise. Might that be an oddly situation where they're getting into a more religious country almost, even though it's changing?
So the structures in the Republic are more formalised. I mean, in England there is technically an established church, but it doesn't really mean very much to most people. There are a few bishops in the Lords, but it's largely something that exists, but most people wouldn't even be aware of it in many cases. In Northern Ireland, we don't have an established church, so that is a difference within the Union. But this is more complex than your question might suggest, in that Wallace Thompson, founding member of the DUP, a Paisleyite of Paisleyites, hardline Protestant, has recently come out several times and said he's open to Irish unity. He's open to thinking about it, and he's a very sincere man. There's no gimmickry in this. But one of the things that attracts him to Ireland is that he thinks that it potentially is a better vehicle for him to have his evangelical Protestantism protected than Britain, which he sees as secularising too much. But there are other people who are pushed in the other direction. And so, I mean, I think ultimately these are two very modern, very sophisticated, very wealthy states which respect the rule of law, which have good rights for minorities. This is a choice that, when I came to write this, the thing that struck me about it most is that this is not the choice that faced a Protestant in Monaghan in 1912. It's not the choice that faced a West Belfast Catholic in 1950. This is a situation where it's not like Northern Ireland is moving into Russia from Ukraine. It's more like Canada moving into America. And even as I say that, I know that that's not quite the analogy that it was when I wrote it in the book. But this is not, I'm not in any way downplaying the significance of identity. It's hugely important culturally, all of those things, absolutely. But in practical terms, are you going to be massively richer or poorer one way or the other? Are you going to be persecuted, whether you're religious or non-religious, whatever? No, is my rough idea.
Okay, I'm going to wrap it. And I'm going to finish by asking you all one more question and a show of hands of this. So earlier you were asked, did you want to be for or against, or were you undecided? Can any of you see yourself changing your minds? So who would change their minds or think they might be open to changing their minds? I think that's really interesting, isn't it? So no one thinks they could imagine changing their minds. That's my question. Do you think for or against United Ireland? For or against United Ireland. So you voted for or against earlier.
Can I clarify? Is it changing your mind from what you said earlier, or changing your mind at all?
At all. From what you said at all. From your current position. If you think now you would vote no, or you think now you would vote for, could you see yourself in the next 5 years maybe changing your mind? Or is your position fixed? So who would think they could change their mind? Okay, and who thinks, no, I'm not changing my mind? Francie, I knew you'd vote that. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, I know I've kept you late. Sam McBride, unbelievable. An hour and 45 minutes. Thank you. Thanks. Okay.
Thank you so much. That was amazing discussion. It was fantastic. Just a few points to note before tomorrow morning. So we're starting at 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. We're a little bit earlier tomorrow morning, but we're starting with the Constitution, which will get everyone up early and loads of energy for that. There's a sea swim going to happen in Port New tomorrow morning. So if you want to join the sea swimmers, you meet them at 8 a.m. outside, nice and early start, or 8:15 a.m. in Port New Pier. There is traditional music now going to happen in the Highlands Hotel bar, so please, everyone when they're finished, you can join us for all the chats you want on United Ireland, wherever you discuss today. So join us in the bar. Thank you so much. Thanks for everything.